Do you remember when Konami's heroic robots RD-008 and RC-011 saved the day, protecting the Earth time and time again from invading alien armies or robots or aliens? No? Well, if you do, chances are you grew up in Europe. Cultural differences vary from region to region, and regulatory authority of the media that is enjoyed by kids also does as well. Now this put Konami in a pickle, because their long-running action game series Contra was overtly inspired by violent American sci-fi and action movies of the 1980s, complete with the main characters that were basically Xerox copies of action stars Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone from the Terminator and the Rambo, respectively. So the solution that they came up with was to redesign the heroes and the villain characters in the Contra game series and turn an evil army of humanoid soldiers under the command of evil aliens into an evil army of robot soldiers under the commands of aliens. But this also included redesigning Bill Ritzer and Lance Bean into RD-008 and RC-011. This is all done to make the German federal agency BPjM and protective parents all across Europe happy. Now, it's worth noting that Konami didn't just change the skin tones and call it a day, but they actually created interesting designs. The look of the main characters obviously takes inspiration from contemporary mecha designs in manga and anime series, such as Super Dimensional Fortress Macross, Appleseed, and Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam, Mobile Suit Pat Labor, especially with their long stylized legs and shoulders and arms and the inclusion of aileron antenna. You can clearly see the influence of Shoji Kamamori's work in the sharp angles and heroic proportions. The sources of Konami's inspiration were mostly unreleased outside of Japan at the time of Probotector's first game in 1990, but still, that gives them a pretty darn cool, distinct Japanese look. Now, they had come up with a cool name that drove home the idea that these were good robots that didn't glorify war too much, so they came up with a portmanteau of robot and protector to arrive on Probotector. This is a very French way of saying mashup. Now, they didn't just use the Probotector names and design in Europe, but they also released them in Australia and New Zealand, which also used the same PAL TV standards. Australia, in particular, has always had a bit of a regressive approach to video game violence, despite being the country that spawned the films The Road Warrior, Mad Max, and Crocodile Dundee. Anytime I get to mention the cheesiness of Crocodile Dundee, it's a good day. And I guess New Zealand is okay producing the piano, but then again, they're the country that gave the world Meet the Feebles and Lord of the Rings, but that's just Peter Jackson. He sort of statistically messes up the bell curve for the rest of the New Zealand filmmakers. And if redesigning the characters was not enough, just to make things extra confusing, there are actually 3 games on different platforms that are called Probotector and 2 games that are called Probotector 2. The first Probotector is a European release of the legendary Contra on the NES. So, it is a pure challenging action game, and the controls are famously tight, and the gameplay keeps you on your toes by mixing classic side-scrolling levels with innovative pseudo-3D base levels. The game is a technical marvel, but the real charm is seeing this classic through the robotic lens. The core gameplay to Contra is identical, but the aesthetic overhaul is total. Every single human soldier is now a mechanical menace, giving the game a less gritty jungle war feel and more of a futuristic sci-fi vibe that many players, including myself, find even cooler than the original. Probotector 2: Return of the Evil Forces is the PAL version of Super C, and it refines everything that made the first game great. The most significant change was replacing the 3D base stages with new top-down, vertically scrolling levels, which added a fantastic variety. The level design is arguably even stronger here, with more memorable set pieces and the introduction of a sloped terrain that really adds a new layer of strategy. Probotector 2 is another technical showcase on the NES, handling immense on-screen action with almost no slowdown. For many, this is the superior of the two NES titles thanks to its relentless pacing and meticulous fair challenge. Probotector on Game Boy. The first portable Probotector wasn't a port, but it was an entirely new game known as Operation C in the US. It is a technical masterpiece that flawlessly condensed the series' fast-paced action onto the Game Boy's monochrome screen. The game is worth playing not just for its technical skill, but for the mechanics that it introduced. It was the first game with auto-fire as a default, and more importantly, it debuted the fan-favorite homing gun, which fires projectiles that seek out the enemies. This was a game changer, making it a bit more accessible without sacrificing the challenge. It's a fantastic game on its own right and a vital piece of the series' evolution. Super Probotector Alien Rebels is the PAL version of Contra 3, and it is widely considered one of the greatest action games ever made. It was a true 16-bit powerhouse featuring huge sprites, cinematic set pieces, and breakthrough Mode 7 graphics. Interestingly, the enemies in Contra 3 were already aliens, so the game could have been released in Europe without changes, but Konami stuck with the branding that they had built by replacing the human heroes with new Probotector models. One downside for European players is that the game ran noticeably slower on its PAL version, and the famous 30-life Konami code was disabled for some reason, making an already tough game even harder. Luckily, there's a ROM hack available to re-enable it, and yet another example about how retro gaming is better today than it was back in the day. Probotector for Mega Drive, the sole entry on a Sega platform. Probotector for the Mega Drive is a different beast entirely. It feels more like a continuous boss rush mode than a traditional platformer. It was groundbreaking for its branching story and paths and 4 unique playable characters around the world. However, the PAL version is the most drastically altered game in the series. All 4 protagonists were converted into similar-looking robots, and the difficulty was ramped up to an insane degree with 1-hit kills and only 4 continues. On top of making the game brutally difficult, the PAL version removed one of Hardcore's most interesting features, a branching story path where you could actually choose to side with a villain, Colonel Bahamut, and fight against your former allies. European players were locked into the good guy path, removing a fascinating piece of the original game. While this version of the game was initially only released in PAL region and was set to 50 Hz, this would play a little slower. However, when Konami included it in the Contra Anniversary Collection, it was updated to 60 Hz, the full speed of North American TVs, and hackers have extracted the ROM for us to enjoy. But I will not link to it, but you can find it on the internet. Probotector 2 for the Game Boy. The final game to carry the name of Probotector was Probotector 2 for the Game Boy, a portable demake of the Super Nintendo behemoth Contra 3. Developed by the German studio Factor 5, this game was a stunning technical achievement, successfully translating the scale and intensity of a 16-bit blockbuster onto the 8-bit handheld. While some compromises were made, like removing the jet bike stage and the ability to carry 2 weapons, this game is celebrated for its sheer ambition. It remarkably captures the feel of its big brother on the 16-bit hardware, from level themes to boss battles, and it stands as a premier example of a demake done right. It was a fitting end to the Probotector era. After 1994, the Probotector name was officially retired. The next game, Contra Legacy of War on the PlayStation, was released in Europe but under its original title. But for a generation of European gamers, the series will always be remembered, not for its human commandos, but for its cool, robotic protectors. So, did you grow up playing Probotectors in Europe, New Zealand, or Australia? Or is this the first time that you're hearing about Contra's robotic cousins? Let me know down in the comments. So I make videos on retro gamings and awesome retro stuff each week. So if you don't want to miss the next one, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.